Hi everyone, in today's video, we'll take a look at how to create an accessible modal pop-up using modern HTML. Now let's take a look at an example. So here we have an example of a Netflix mockup homepage, and on the homepage, we have a button in the hero section that says more info. When I click on it, it opens up a modal dialog, and you can see it is nicely centered. Let me close it. If there is more content in the pop-up, it will still work. So I click on it. Now the pop-up has more content, as you can see with the scrolling sidebar. When I scroll down, you can see I can scroll through the modal. Notice that the background is not being scrolled, only the pop-up. So this video is going to be in stages, and I really hope you follow along until the end. First, we'll start with the content that we already have. Then I will introduce what are the semantic HTML I think should be added, followed by what is the simple JavaScript that we can use to create the dialog. Next, we start adding in things like the aria attributes that might be used to enhance the accessibility. And finally, I'll show you an extra JavaScript I've used to improve the user experience. So now let's jump into it. So here we are in the builder. I'm using Bricksbuilder for this tutorial, but you can use any builder of your choice. So first, we have the content. So I have a more info element, and I have what I want to show in the modal. So the first question we'll be answering now is, what is the semantic HTML that we need to use for these elements? So we are trying to use the more info element to trigger a pop-up. So since we're trying to create an action which is triggering a pop-up, that means this more info should be a button. So it should not be an A tag or a span or a div, but a button. That gives the advantage of we just need to add one event listener, which is the click event listener, and it will add all the rest of the event listeners for us. So the spacebar, the enter key, and other keys that are related to a button. That's why we always advocate for using the proper semantic HTML, because it already has everything baked into it. So for the HTML tag, I'm going to use the button. So that now makes this more info element to be a semantic button. Then for the content, I'm going to use the dialog element. So for that, I'm going to use a div because I don't want Bricksbuilder to interfere with anything that has to do with it. So let me click away from this element. Then I'll click the div. This div is going to be our dialog element. And then I'll drop the actual content into it. So this dialog element, I'm going to give it the HTML tag of dialog. So the HTML tag, the beauty of Bricks is that you can add any tag you want as long as it is whitelisted. So let me choose custom, and I'll say dialog. But notice it gives me an error because the dialog element, as of this version, is not whitelisted. So you need to whitelist it yourself. You can go ahead and check this documentation. It will open in a new tab, and this is what you need to add. So you can just copy this into your code snippets plugin or into your child theme, and all you have to do is just declare that you want dialog to be part of it. So here we have WP code box. I already have it added, and I've just added dialog into the allowed additional tags. Then let me just activate it. I'll save. Then now when I come back to the element, let me just save it. And I'll go ahead and I'll refresh. And when we come back to that element, it is the dialog element. Let me go ahead and collapse everyone. So under the dialog element, you see that now the custom tag is allowed. This is specific to Bricksbuilder. So if you're using any other builder, you might want to check out with their documentation how they add the dialog custom tag. So now we have our two elements. The other one we have to check is the close button as well. We need to make sure it is also having the custom tag of button. So those are the HTML elements that we need. Now that we've added the semantic HTML, The next thing we'll do is to add the JavaScript. But before we do that, we need to give the elements some IDs and classes. So let's go ahead and add the IDs that we'll use in the JavaScript. Starting with the button element, I'll go under the Style tab, and under Attributes, I'll give it a new attribute. The name will be ID, and the value will be ddm-show-button. That is BTN. The reason I'm using show is that the syntax that they use for dialogs is show and close. So to follow in line with that syntax, I'll use show button, and the dialog, I'll give it an ID as well. So ID of DDM dialog. Finally, the close button, I'll give it an attribute. So ID of DDM close BTN. Okay, so I've given them IDs. Now we can add our JavaScript. To add the JavaScript in Bricks, I'll use a code element, or you can use your WP code box or whatever code snippets plugin you have. So let me go ahead and add a new element. Let me first deselect. The element is a code element. And I'll go under the content, make sure it is allowed to execute code. We'll get rid of the HTML and PHP. All we need is the JavaScript and maybe the CSS tab. So for the JavaScript, we'll start with a DOM content loaded first to make sure that our script is going to run at the right time. And then let me go ahead and close it. Okay. Then within this DOM content loaded, first I'll define some variables. So the IDs that we've added here, I'm going to assign them to some variables. So the variables will just be, first one is dialog ELEM. I'm using the get element by ID, and I'm targeting the DDM dialog. The next one is targeting the container inside the dialog. I gave it a class name of DDM dialog _ inner. So that's why we have in the code, this is the inner container. Then we have the show button and the close button. So the only thing we need to do now is basically to run the function, which I'll leave a link to it in the description. These are the two functions. First is the show button that just to write, we target the dialog element and then we say show modal. This function, show modal, is all we need to show the dialog. The other function, close, is all we need to close the dialog. Copy, come back to my dialog and paste. So I've given it the function name of open dialog, and I've assigned that dialog element. This is the dialog element constant. And I'm saying just run this function whenever I use the function called open dialog. Okay. So now I've defined all of these. The reason why I'm defining them in another function is because to improve the accessibility, I'm going to be adding some extra things. But for now, this is all we need. So now the last thing we need to do is actually run these functions. So what I'll be doing is I'll be binding these functions to the click event. So I'll say when the show button is clicked, run the open dialog. When the close button is clicked, run the close dialog function. So there's just these two functions. And that's it. This is all we need to create an accessible dialog. One thing I forgot to mention before we continue is you'll notice that in the builder, the dialog is hidden. If you want to style the element in the builder, what you need to do is come over to the dialog, then under the style tab, go under the attributes, and you need to add an attribute called open, OPEN. The moment you do that, it will open up the dialog for you to be able to style in the builder. But make sure once you save it and want to preview on the front end, you get rid of that open, because this open is supposed to be triggered by that show modal function. So let's say I've designed it. As you can see, The dialog element comes with some default styling, like this white background you can see at the back. You can now go ahead and style everything before you put it on the front end. But let's go ahead and see how it looks like on the front end. So I'll delete this open. I'll go ahead and save it. And we'll preview on the front end. So now let me go to the button and I'll click on it. And see it immediately brings our modal and we can scroll the modal. Everything is working perfectly. Now that we've added the JavaScript, next I'm going to show you some of the default styling that comes with the dialog and what you might want to change. Then we'll go ahead and enhance the accessibility and we'll go ahead and improve it even further. So let's jump back in. So let's go ahead and inspect it using the dev tool. So I'll right click on inspect, and we'll go ahead and inspect the dialog. So you can see this is the dialog, and the default styles that come with it are, you see these are from the user agent. It has an overlay of auto, which is useful when we want to add some animations. Then it comes with the position fixed. That's why you see it at the center of the screen. Then you see some default margins. So we see the max width. It comes to the max width that says calc 100% minus 2em minus 6 pixels, but Bricks is overwriting that. So that's why you see it's going from edge to edge. Ideally, it will not go from edge to edge. It will have the same space at the top, that same space on the right, on the left, and on the bottom. Because you can see there's a bit of space. But because I'm using Bricks, it has that max width of 100%, which overwrites the user style agent. Then we also have some max height, which is the same thing as the max width, to add some extra spacing. And we have the visibility, visible, overflow, auto, which is why it can scroll, and the user select text. We also have a display block. So that's why I chose to use the div, because when this is closed, so let me go ahead and close it, you see that the dialog element, based on the user style agent, should automatically have a display of none. So that's why I chose to use the div. If I'd used any other element in Bricks, it would have given it a display, and that would have ruined the entire functionality of the dialog. So you see, these are all by default. We'll also go ahead and just quickly check out the accessibility tree. Then we'll check out using the keyboard and see if the focus is being handled and everything. So let me click on the accessibility tree, and we'll go to the accessibility layer. So let's go back to our dialog. So let me go ahead and click on the element to make sure it's opened. And we have it opened. So now that it's open, let me go ahead and inspect it. And you see, we have our dialog element. And you notice that we're now in a shadow root area. So basically, every other thing has been hidden away. So that already shows us the accessibility that has been imputed. So right now, once the dialog is open, we no longer have access to anything in the background, only the dialog that we can access. And you'd see it also has this modal equal to true. So in the old days, when we're using the role equal to dialog on a div, we had to manually add this aria modal equal to true. But now, using the dialog element, it automatically has modal equal to true to tell us that this is a modal type of dialog, because there are two types of dialog. There's the non-modal dialog and the modal dialog. The moment you use that function in your JavaScript that says show modal, it automatically triggers the aria modal in the dialog element, which now makes it a dialog modal. Then what we may want to do now is add some aria, either aria labeled by or aria label, to announce to the screen reader what is the title of our dialog. Now, if you want to style this element, you can change the max width. That will now make it a bit smaller. So let's go ahead and test that out. So I'll go back to the builder, and on the dialog element, let me just give it a class name of DDM dialog, just so I don't have to style it on the ID level. And I'll give it some maybe max width. I'll give it a z index just to be safe of 3. Then I'll give it a max width of maybe 60 characters. Let me go ahead and save it. And we'll go ahead and refresh and click on the more info again. You see now the width has become 60 characters and we have our scroll bar. And notice that, like I showed from the accessibility tree, we cannot actually have any interaction with any of these elements in the background. Although this is where the UX is a bit dodgy, is that we can still scroll on the background, but when I press the tab key, I'm only going to be inside of this dialog, or I'll go out into the browser. So it's like this background doesn't exist to screen readers. Only, see, I'm now in the search bar. If I go with the shift tab, I go back into this dialog, and if I press the shift tab, it still goes back into the browser search and the browser tab. It doesn't go into the background. So this is one thing you just need to know, that out of the box it's accessible, but the scroll bar can still interact with the background. But the nice thing is, if the dialog is bigger than the screen, then you get your scroll wheel. And if the dialog is smaller, so let me go ahead and reduce the content in the dialog. So let's just move this image gallery out. Then I'll go ahead and refresh the page. If I go back to the more info and click on it, you see it gets centered. And if I try to zoom in, so if I keep zooming in to about 400%, you notice that it doesn't break. We still get our scroll bar for the dialog element, and we can see all of the content. So it is fully accessible. Then we may want to add a little bit of CSS to make sure that the background is not scrollable, just for improved user experience. And we may want to add some extra CSS to make everything just look nicer and to actually trap the tab key inside of the dialog. So rather than going out into the browser, we may want to add some JavaScript to trap the focus inside the dialog. So now let me go ahead and continue with the improvements. So I'll head back into the builder, and to get rid of that background scroll, so let me first put this element back in. If you want to get rid of the background scroll, I'll come under the code element and I'll add a bit of code that says body. If the body has a dialog element, which is the .ddm-dialog, and that element has an attribute, so open and close the square braces and say open. Then we want to add an overflow of hidden. So let me go ahead and save this. Then we'll go ahead and preview it. And you see now when I open the more info, you see it's only this one that is scrolling. We can't scroll on the background again, just to make everything look nicer. Then I'll go ahead and add the aria attribute. So on the button, I'll come under the style tab, under attributes, I'll add a new attribute, and I'll say the aria-haspopup should be equal to dialog. Save it. The next thing we want to do is, on the dialog itself, we may want to add an aria label or aria labeled by, as well as an aria described by if needed. So I'll add an aria labeled by, which will be connected to the heading. So this heading is a H2 heading. I'll give it an ID. Okay, I've already given it an ID. So the ID is now ddm-dialog-title. Let me copy that. Then I'll come back to my dialog, come under attributes, add attribute. I'll say aria-labeled by should be that title. If I had a description, I will also use the aria described by, which would now give like more description about the dialog. But in this case, I just want a title, which is basically just the name of the movie. Okay, so we have all of those. Let me go back, refresh it, and we'll listen to all of these on a screen reader to see how it actually sounds. Now you see, if I click on the more info, now I get my scroll. And if I go into the inspect, let's first inspect the button itself. Right click, inspect it. Go to the accessibility tree. You see that the button now tells us that it has the aria-haspopup to be dialog. And it gives you the name and everything. So you have the role equal to button, the focusable, yes, the focused true, and then the haspopup to be dialog. So those are the information that is going to be sent to a screen reader user. And when we go into the dialog itself, I'll right click, I'll inspect, and let's go ahead and see the accessibility. It says the role is dialog, the modal equal to true, and the labeled by is this DDM dialog, which is why when we come into the actual dialog, you see that it has a name, which is counterattack Netflix film. It says screen reader only text, and the screen reader user will know, okay, that is the modal that I'm opening is for this movie. I'm going to get a more description about that movie. Okay, let me close this. The next thing we need to now adjust is when you see I open the modal and you see there's this jump in the background. If I close it, you see it's a little bit of jump, and that's because of the scroll bar. So for that, I'm now going to add a bit of CSS and JavaScript, which I will link to in the description, which will basically remove the scroll bar from this dialog element and make it to be on the body. And it will also take care of this jump that we have in the background. And yeah, this is the code we're adding. So I use a bit of JavaScript to add some padding to the right of the background so that that scroll bar will be accounted for. So that is the padding right is added in the JavaScript, and I added some code to make sure that the tab and the shift tab is being trapped inside of the modal. And when we come to the preview, let me go ahead and refresh it again. And when we go to the more info, you see now we have the scroll bar. So anywhere on the page I scrolling it, and when I click, anywhere it closes on the background. The button closes as well. And that's it. If I press the tab key, see, I'm just tabbing through the first element and the close button. Next thing we do is we test it out with a screen reader. So I'll go ahead and close this, and I'll turn on my screen reader. I'll be using NVDA for this test, so I'll use Ctrl-Alt-N.
Accessible Modal Bricks and Bricks Forge Playground, Google Chrome window.
Okay, so we're there. So now let me press the tab key from
Banner landmark logo, primary, about, event, blog link, main landmark, more info button opens dialog.
So let me go back into it so you can hear what it says.
Play button, more info button opens dialog.
It says more info button opens dialog because we use that aria-haspopup equal to dialog. Now if I press the space bar, enter key, or click, it should open up the pop-up and it should read the name of the pop-up. And because it's a pop-up, it will start reading the entire content, but we can stop that. So let me press the space bar.
Counterattack. Netflix film dialogue. An elite team's day off turns into an ambush. An elite team's day off turns into an ambush.
So you see, so he started reading it, that
Netflix film.
It read the name, counterattack, Netflix film, and then it started reading the rest of the content because that's how dialogues tend to work. But you can see I can now start using the tab key inside of the dialogue.
Close dialog button. Mexican visited link. Close dialog button. Mexican visited link.
And my tab key has been trapped. So it is working well with the screen reader. Even if I use the up and down arrow keys, which is what NVDA uses to navigate on an element by element base. So I'll press the down arrow key.
Genres. Visited link Mexican. Military films. Action and adventure films. Weapons against a relentless enemy. An elite team's day off turns into button close dialog, heading level 2 graphic counterattack, heading level 2 graphic counterattack,
So you see,
Netflix film.
I'm pressing the up arrow key. It's not going to go out of this dialog, even with the arrow keys or with the tab key. Everything is trapped well because we're using the proper semantic HTML, which is the dialog element. That automatically just makes everything trapped. The only thing we may want to do is enhance the experience by making sure that the tab key now cycles through the dialog elements. That's all I added in my JavaScript. I did not add any other extra thing to trap the focus. All I was doing is saying, when it gets to the last element within that dialog, go back to the first element with the tab key. But if I'd used a different element that is not semantically correct and I had not done all the other things necessary, then my focus would have been escaping from the dialog. So yeah, that's how to create an accessible dialog. I'll write the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript I used in the description so you can go ahead and check it out for yourself. I might create a code pen or something like that so it's easy for you to play around with it. And if you have any comments or anything you want me to include, let me know in the comments. And before we go off, I'll show you why using aria-haspopup equal to anything other than dialog is not right. So let's jump back in. So here we are back with the button. Now let's say I go to the style tab, and rather than having this aria-haspopup equal to dialog, I decide to say equal to true, which was the old syntax, and I save it. Now watch what happens. If I come back to my page, I refresh it, and I go ahead to use the screen reader again.
Accessible Modal Bricks and Bricks Forge Playground. Go, banner land, prime, about link, main landmark, play button. More info menu button submenu.
Okay, so I'm on the more info menu button submenu. It now announces it as a menu button. The menu button is supposed to be for the menu role, which is what was changed for the aria-haspopup. So make sure you don't use aria-haspopup equal to true because it will now start announcing it as a menu item for NVDA. I don't know about other screen readers. I will test it out with those screen readers soon. But for NVDA, when you use aria-haspopup equal to true, it looks at it as an element which has a role equal to menu. So make sure you use aria-haspopup equal to dialog. So yeah, that's it. Please do leave a thumbs up to make me know that you enjoyed the video. I'll be doing a live stream soon, which I'll leave a link to in the description. You can go ahead and we'll discuss about this aria-haspopup, the modal, the old way of creating a modal, the new way of creating a modal. Everything will be discussed on Thursday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.